Hello there. Welcome to Issue Space. We are a podcast and community for everyone who's working to save the world. I'm Kat Addo. I'm an inclusive social impact strategist and the creator of the space, the curator of these conversations that are really designed to help social change professionals process what it's like to have a 9-to-5 that is meant to change the world. Mostly, literally. We also try to keep the door open for folks who might not yet be in the space, but who are curious about what it's really like. How do you find your way in this work? What are some of the real kind of like tensions or considerations that you'll spend your time thinking about if you devote your career to social change. So that's all part of the spirit and the reason we're so grateful to all of our guests for coming and sharing their wisdom with us. You can learn more about what we're doing at issuespacemedia.com. This episode of the Issue Space podcast is called On and Off the Ground, Finding Your Best Vantage Point for Change. And this conversation was inspired by two things. So one is a topic that I truly never shut up about, which is what it felt like when I was trying to reorient my career from the trajectory that I was going in, working in media and entertainment in the music industry, to wanting to do work for positive social outcomes. When I was trying to figure out how to make that leap, I felt very intimidated, very overwhelmed, very confused about where to start. I couldn't find a smooth entry point that kind of told me, here are the paths. Here's how you can situate yourself in these paths. So I'm always looking to smooth that road for the people coming behind me. And I think one of the forks in the road that you face when you're thinking about taking on social change work, it's not just, am I going to work on one issue area or am I going to work across many? It's not just, am I going to work in a hyper-local sense or with a certain political movement or political figure, or am I going to kind of float around? There's also this question about, am I going to pursue change at a higher systems level, thinking about politics, narrative, media, that stuff that is not quite in community, but that certainly impacts, we hope, communities across the country, in the US where I live and work, or even reverberating around the world? Or am I going to do that work from a grassroots level? Am I going to start or join something in community and work on direct service and work on building a vision from that vantage point? So it's one of many forks in the road that you might face. Which brings me to the second inspiration for this conversation, which was a chat that I had with a friend who I actually used to manage in the space in her first ever job in this space. And we stayed in touch over the years, and I kind of watched her move from where we started out consulting and working on campaigns and creative for social impact, to she went back into teaching, which was kind of her roots, to she went to a huge consulting agency, global firm, to eventually landing in a community organization working with Indigenous groups on land rights and protections. And when I caught up with her one of these most recent times, she talked about how much she felt that she was in the right place. And it wasn't that there weren't opportunities for change making in those other contexts. It wasn't that she was completely, not in the right space in terms of the social impact space and wanted to move on completely. But she could see now where she's situated in her community work, just that sense of satisfaction, that sense of flow, that for my skills, for my goals, for the way I want my career to play out, this is the vantage point of work that makes sense to me. And so I'm so happy for her as an individual to have found that right fit. And it sparked a curiosity for me to talk to other folks working in social change about how they oriented in the right fit for themselves. So we have three voices in addition to mine that you will hear from today. I'll share a little bit about our guests and invite them to say hello. So our first guest is Rachel Sumac. Rachel is the founder of Swipe Out Hunger, which is a sort of pay it forward program used to end hunger on college campuses by empowering students to dedicate meal plan swipes to other students who are experiencing food insecurity. Rachel also authored the corresponding policy, Hunger Free Campus Act, which is now running in 22 states, the last that I saw. She's a speaker, she's a board member, and I really just respect that Rachel has come into this work from such an intimate place as sharing a meal. So I'm sure we'll have a lot to learn from Rachel. And Rachel, I want to invite you to say hello.
Thanks, Kat. It's great to be here on the show. I'm proud to have grown up, born and raised in Los Angeles, California. Both of my parents immigrated to the U.S. from Iran and really came here to pursue the American dream. A part of that journey included me relying on free school lunch, relying on programs like SNAP, or formerly known as food stamps. And those programs for just 2-3 years being the thing that kept our family on the path that we got on. And that so much empowers what my commitment to the sector comes from, this notion that people might need a few supportive resources at a point in time to then go on and live their dream. So really excited to share how my experience, and then also just the past 10 years of growing Swipe Out Hunger, really forms why I'm so optimistic and hopeful about what our sector is doing.
Beautiful. Rachel, what did you see yourself doing for work when you were younger, when you were growing up? Did you know this was your path?
This is so embarrassing because people often have like really sweet answers. I wanted to be a U.S. Senator.
Oh, let's get to it.
And I'm so glad to have now learned that you can create just as much, if not more, impact from the outside of the halls of power. And very happy to not have to be under the expectation of going to a lot of rubber chicken dinners, and can just, on my own terms, create the impact that I want.
Thank you, Rachel. I want to introduce our second guest, Jason Rezepka. Jason is the president and founder of Writ Large, which is a shop that helps social impact leaders scale their advocacy efforts and tell meaningful kind of cultural stories around them. And that is in service of a range of organizations, from grassroots coalitions all the way to major household brands, global brands that you would know. And prior to that, Jason has worked across grassroots, major advocacy, and media spaces. He has spent time at the Skill Up Coalition, supporting workers who were impacted by the pandemic. He has worked at Everytown for gun safety. He has been a principal at SY Partners, specifically on their societal impact practice. And then he's worked at Viacom and MTV. So definitely familiar with toggling vantage points in terms of how you tell stories about change, how you engage with partners and people in your change making, and just how you think of yourself in that landscape. So Jason, welcome. Happy to have you.
Yeah, thanks so much. I'm thrilled to be here. Kind of started out as a accidental activist and been fortunate to be able to make a career out of it. And really always appreciated the chance to share what I'd learned with those who are coming up in the path behind me. I love the fact that you've started this podcast, and excited to share wisdom that our young change makers can hopefully act on.
Well, thank you so much. Can I ask, what was the accidental activism?
Well, I was a comms guy. I started out in PR and kind of toggled through a few different kinds of strategic communications. And I ended up being recruited to MTVU, the college network at MTV. And the guy, my mentor, key mentor of mine, who started the channel, Stephen Friedman, had the idea that everybody expected MTV's college network to be like spring break, wet t-shirt contest, like just stereotypical college stuff.
I see.
And he felt that we were going to give a megaphone to young people to help them have an impact on the issues they cared the most about. And when I got there, one of those issues was the genocide in Darfur. And so I saw like a grassroots swell of college students across the country rising up to try and stop a genocide happening half a world away, and doing that work and being part of that and seeing that you could actually use your talents in a way where you can have a good living, make good money, but also make an impact. It kind of rewired me as a person and rewired me as a professional. And I would say everything in my career from that point has been on a different path because of that experience.
That's super powerful. And I love that takeaway that it's not just, do I provide for myself and my dreams, or for the world and for community, but it really is possible to hold the two together. It can feel kind of weird to think about. I don't know. Sometimes I get like, oh, is it weird that this is a job, or is it like amazing that this is a job? But I always land on that it's amazing. And that the more we can get people to see it as a viable path for themselves, to give to both themselves and the broader society, the better off we'll be. Thank you. Jason, do you want to share what you wanted to be when you were growing up?
When I was a little kid, I wanted to make ads. I wanted to be in advertising because I just thought that this was the coolest thing that you could, in 30 seconds, tell a story. And I felt like most of the commercials that I saw sucked. And I was like, I could make better commercials than these guys. So as a little kid, that's what I aspired to. And then weirdly, I ended up making PSAs that ran to a national audience that, helped to get, tens of thousands of young people to go get registered to vote. So I could have never imagined that was going to manifest given the path that I took, but been super fortunate.
From a tiny seed. I love that. You're our first madman on Issue Space. Thanks, Jason. The last guest that I want to introduce is Carolyn Gilbert. Carolyn is a business development specialist and a proposal writer with a range of experience on topics like refugee resettlement, democracy, sustainability, and the storytelling of those things. She is currently at, do you say DAI? Do you say the acronym? Or
DAI.
DAI doing this work. And prior to that, she has held roles at the Department of Justice here in the United States. She's been a graduate consultant at NATO. Like she is, if you say high level, this resume is like what is like the uppermost echelon of power. So Carolyn, I'm so happy to have you. Thanks for being in the space.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a really exciting discussion to be a part of. I think it'd be great.
We are very pleased to have you. Is there anything that you'd like to share about your background growing up to round out how you come to this work?
As Kat mentioned, work in international development. And I think a lot of us international development professionals don't necessarily identify as social impact professionals per se, but we certainly are. I certainly identify as a social impact professional. We're in the work of improving communities and people's lives around the world. And international development projects are just as diverse as the domestic focused, social impact ones, and require, interdisciplinary people from all backgrounds. And so I'm happy to represent international development professionals in this conversation as well.
I love it. What did little Carolyn want to be when she grew up?
So when I was little, I wanted to be an archaeologist. And I'm pretty sure it's because of something I saw on PBS Kids, because I watched a lot of PBS growing up. So I grew up in rural Vermont, so it certainly wasn't anything there that exposed me to archaeology. So it must have been that.
I love the golden age of PBS Kids. Well, I would consider the golden age.
Oh, yeah.
Late 80s, early 90s. That's my bias.
Yeah, and it's digging up treasure, getting dirty in the dirt and, finding cool stuff. So I get the appeal for sure.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thanks to all of you for kind of sharing where you're coming from. So I'm curious, you started to get into this a little bit, but I'm curious about if any of you experienced that fork in the road in the moment that you knew, like, I want to use my gifts to try to improve the world. I want to use my skills to try to improve the world. What was the path like for you in terms of, were you even thinking about a big landscape of change and there's levels up here and levels down here, or were you just responding to the need, or a combination of the two? I'd open it up to anybody who sees themselves in that kind of decision.
I often joke that I volunteered for the first time ever when I started Swipe Out Hunger. It wasn't because I was like, I'm going to start a nonprofit and I'm going to change the world. It was this frustration that me and my friends had extra money in our meal plans and other students were hungry. And all I wanted to do was get my money back, right? It wasn't even this like deep care for the world. Like my first step in was frustration and taking some action. That eventually went to the, a few days into running Swipe Out Hunger drives where students were buying to-go boxes of food with their extra meal credits, that I had this moment where I looked around. I'm like, there are 12 students here who didn't know each other before, who didn't realize how powerful they were, who didn't realize they could end hunger. And they are having this tingly feeling that I had the first day that I handed out food. And that is what got me even like from 0 to 1, as we say, to I want to help other students have this kind of catalytic feeling that like they're powerful and they can impact their community. So that was like my step in. And from that journey, I graduated. There's like 2 other steps here. I became a case manager. I did a year of service with AmeriCorps. I spent a year in Chicago directly helping people who were homeless and in poverty get back on their feet. So I'm like, okay, there's direct service, right? I thought that was the only way to make change, to go and sit with people who are struggling and help them get back on their feet. And that didn't totally resonate with me. I wanted something more, right? I saw my friends who eventually became social workers loving that role. And I'm like, I'm not feeling it the way they are. So then the work that I had continued with Swipe, I was still doing after hours. And I would spend a few hours on a phone call with a student at UC Santa Barbara, where they're like, how do I get started? We started at UCLA. And a few weeks later, that student would come back and say, all your phone calls led to us now launching a chapter, and we're going to have thousands of meals served, right? So I started to realize, okay, I'm more excited about systems level change. My friends more excited about direct change. But what it really took was that first step, right? For me to even start to learn before I had an answer. I couldn't have conceived of the answer.
And it's so interesting hearing from the outside. I kind of presumed and projected that you were going to be like, I only believe in bottom up change. And, just like you said, at one point you thought that was the only way to create change, because it just feels so intimate. This idea of sharing your resources in the most immediate sense for something as fundamental as nourishment. Just, I don't know, my mind goes to like the heart of grassroots and the heart of community support. But from your vantage point, even though that is the manifestation of your care and the feelings that you had in the moment, it really was the catalyst for you kind of looking upwards and outwards about systemically, where is the disconnect? Why do I even have to exist in this intervention? Which is super relatable.
Yeah. And to make sure that I had team members around me who were more obsessed with the grassroots direct change, so that we could design programs that were really thoughtful and brought in all kinds of folks. So it didn't mean that I was going to not talk to my social work friends anymore. It meant that I had to really build a diverse team of people coming to this with those different values.
Right. That complement to realize the change. I'm curious, Jason, because in your organization, you are supporting others' movements and efforts. And, it's your shop. You could go as broad or as narrow as you want, but you choose to be inclusive of supporting organizations of all scale. And so I'm just curious, like, what is it for you that makes you feel that your like the highest and best use of your skills is to kind of move across that spectrum of system versus in-community change?
A couple dimensions to it. I think today in my practice with writ large, I really consider the experiences that I've been fortunate to have throughout my career, and how can I be of service to others, harnessing that knowledge to help folks kind of cross divides, overcome obstacles that they're dealing with now. And I don't think that I would have been drawn to this in the early going. I was much more like wanting to be in the arena, be a decision maker. Now I'm at a place where I've been fortunate to make a lot of decisions and map outcomes and see, generally speaking, when we do this happens, and generally speaking, like that doesn't work. So I was able to make this transition from what we'd say is being a principal to being an agent. Like for the long time, I was a principal and I loved it, but I got to a point where I didn't necessarily want to be out front anymore. I wanted to be more behind the scenes in service to others as an agent. And, we talk about forks in the road. And I love this kind of metaphor of navigation, because I think there are a lot of young people who think about their career as a roadmap. They have a destination in mind, and I'm going to go here, and then I'm going to go over there, and then that's going to enable me to get there. I think for my career, the metaphor has been really much more of a compass. And there are times when I want to run in that direction or I want to run away. I want to run the other direction because I'm not feeling this. And I've had several pivot points where early on as a tech PR guy, like I woke up one day and I was pitching stories about data hygiene. And I was just like, I want to turn and run the other way because this sucks. Like it's not rewarding, it's like I don't care, and so it wasn't even, oh, I need to then do this other thing instead. It was just like whatever I do next, it can't be tech PR. So when I moved to New York, I was like, oh, I'm open to corporate, I'm open to investor relations, just some other domain that is not tech PR. And that was really the only imperative that I set. And that opened, it sent me down a path that led me to all these other opportunities. But I think it's okay for young change makers to not have it all figured out. And I think actually, there's a adage for the Midwest where I'm from is if you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans, so it's like, there are a lot of times where you're going to be very disabused of where you think you're going, but rooted in principles, have a sense of what lights you up, but not to feel that you have to have it all mapped out because I think it's hard to achieve.
I think that's so wise. And it's like the most important decision that you made in your path was not where you were going. It was the openness. It wasn't like a target, which in my experience, when I was trying to get into the work, I was kind of like, I was pulled by a little bit of fear, a little bit of feeling like I need a practical outlet for the anxiety that I'm experiencing. But then ignorance of the space forced me to be open because I literally didn't know what I was looking for. I would do like free association Googling, like, is fundraising a thing? Like trying to find what I meant, or like nonprofits nearby. I had no idea. And then through my being open and my eventual employer being open, we kind of like found each other, and it was the right space for me. But I think that's such an interesting reminder. And it reminds me of, chatting with a previous guest in the space, Erica Soto Lamb, also from the MTV family. And she was saying what a trip it is now when she gets intern applications and they're talking about like their formal education and social impact, because in her mind, there's so much of social impact that is just taking a response to a need with the skills that you have, with the people around you, and kind of like putting it together, which isn't to say there aren't very concrete skills and, rigorous academia in the space, but it does also give like, we're doing our best, we're figuring it out. And so holding that reality in mind with a sense of planning or a sense of like kind of academic mapping, I think is really wise advice to people. Carolyn, how about for you?
Yeah, I think that's a great point that you've made, Jason, because I remember such a fork in the road for myself shortly after graduating college. And I remember sort of, thinking left, thinking right, thinking of like the high, maybe some more systems level. I was considering law school and working for the Department of Justice, but at the same time volunteering in the refugee community in Albany, New York, where I was living. And after work every day, going to some of these families' houses and practicing the little Swahili I had known from some college experiences, and helping translate mail and get kids off their first school bus after school, and having this more sort of social work experience. And so trying to decide, maybe law school, maybe an MSW. And then fast forward to now, I'm in neither of those places. So it's really, so nonlinear. There's, maybe two choices in front of you. And then in 5 years, you're on some planet that you never even knew existed back then. So for me, it was definitely a consideration that I made, and I knew I wanted to go back to school, and ultimately got my master's in England, which was a really good choice for me in the end, but was also motivated by finances. It was ultimately cheaper for me to get my master's in Europe than the US. And again, that's part of the reason, for better or worse, that I didn't go to law school, was looking at the 3-year commitment outside of the workforce that I would have to make, knowing how much it took. So those were real considerations I had at that point. And then ultimately deciding to get my master's and turn to international development, heavily influenced by my experience working with resettled families in the U.S. However, after getting, my degree, the first job offer I got was in business development and proposal writing, which I didn't really knew existed prior to applying for the job. And 5 years later, I'm still in that particular line of work in the sector. And it's a really nice fit for me, I think, for a lot of different reasons. Partly because I'm in this space where I get to just learn from people in all directions and just help them sort of articulate and organize their ideas in a way that I know a funder or donor will like, so that they can get the money they need to do good work. And I don't have to have the solutions, but I can instead just connect with the smart people and who know those communities or technical areas best. So I feel like my skill set and position there in that environment is a really nice fit for me.
That is something that I was surprised and encouraged to see moving into this space, that there's definitely a role for facilitators. It's not to say that you're without experience or expertise, but there are a lot of moments where what is needed is not another, quote, movement leader or another, quote, community solution, but more bringing together across the system, people, resources, ideas, platforms. And I think in different ways, that's kind of the work that we all are or have been a part of. May I ask just a question that just occurred to me? I'm always very curious about folks' origin stories in relation to their relationship to this work. I am curious if anything comes to mind when I ask, what did change making and supporting community look like around you when you were growing up? What kind of modeling of these supportive actions and values did you experience in your childhoods or in your formative years that might have planted a seed for what you do today?
I had a friend recently say, why isn't I'm an Iranian Jew, why isn't the Iranian Jewish community more involved in, the civic sector? And he's like, we should start a 501c3 nonprofit to engage. I'm like, we don't always need a legal status 501c3 organization with 3 staff to create change. I grew up with a model much more similar to mutual aid, where, we know a family's struggling, we're going to make sure to invite them to Shabbat for the next 3-4 weeks so that they have food, and we're going to cook extra to make sure they have leftovers. And it's this everyone knows, but we don't really talk about it, which is kind of the challenge, the stigma piece. But it was more so, you have an obligation to drop things off, to take their kid, people coming over, us going over, spending time where we knew we needed help. Again, not always having to have things be in a traditional nonprofit structure, but in this more we see, and so we're responsible to each other.
It's interesting as well, because sometimes I will go back and forth with myself, there's so much kindness in communities, and there are members of any community, I do believe, who will lend a hand to those in need. And I think what distracts me to the point of making it a professional path is that I want to reduce the need for that in the first place, which might be idealistic and not realistic and just not the human experience. But if I think about my own, what kind of pulls me up to why do I like narrative and communications and, things like that, quite apart from it being aligned with my skill set, I think I'm always trying to get to what is the root harmful idea that if it was just, in our lifetime, if we made it have 10% less a hold, we might be able to unlock other practical, tangible solutions from there. And so I'm always kind of vacillating. But sometimes I don't know if you've ever felt this, sometimes I have a weird sense of guilt or self-judgment for not being a person who's I only want to work in community. I only want to stop the bleeding today. Because I think probably what was modeled for me was a similar sort of rapid response, get in there. And it's not that I don't respect that or see the need for that or for that. It's not that that wouldn't bless me. Like, if God forbid I had an intense need, we definitely need to stay grounded and connected to just that baseline community. But I feel like sometimes I judge myself a little bit uh, uh, because I do this from like a laptop. Do you know what I mean? I don't know if you've experienced similar or if you have things from your own childhoods that formed what you thought about as like real legitimate change making in addition to the 3-person nonprofits.
Well, on to your last point, Kat, never that, because I know I use a metaphor of like a tug of war. Like there are people and forces on a lot of issues pulling on one end of the rope or the other, and there are a whole bunch of people who are standing on the sidelines watching it happen or turned away. So I think we need everybody to pull on the end of good that we can, and there's so many different ways by which people need to contribute their skills and talents at different altitudes, bringing different masteries to the table. So I would quiet those voices. There's my personal mental model is we all need to contribute in lots of different ways, and there's no one right way. To your question of what was modeled, I mean, that's what makes my activist career especially surprising. Is you mentioned Mad Men. I remember a scene in Mad Men where the Drapers finish eating lunch, and I think they throw their garbage out the window of their car, or like they're in a park and they just like drop it on their ground. Like so. This is the '50s. I grew up in the early '80s, not far removed from that. Like there was nothing. I mean, like I think Gen Xers were notoriously very self-centered and vain, and in many ways like a pendulum swing from the generation that came before. But I didn't vote in the first 2 presidential elections that I could have. I'd never donated any money to charity. I'd never volunteered. I remember in college actually being actively annoyed by activists in the student union who would have these big signs that join with me to end hunger. And my reaction is like, you guy with the scraggly beard are not ending hunger. You and I together are not ending hunger. Like this is part of the human condition. This is ironic, Rachel, given your work. But to tell you the truth, I felt activists had poor messaging. I didn't find it believable. And this is a tension when you do kind of movement building and national work, is like painting a picture of the world that we want to achieve. There's no acceptable amount of suicide. There's no acceptable amount of a lot of these of gun violence, right? So we push for zero, none. But there are a lot of folks who are more like me as a young person who was not a 1% activist, who was really like disaffected. And so how do we bring those folks in? So I spent a lot of time with messaging and the appeals. I'm programming for my college self who was not interested in activism, was interested in, partying. Right. So I don't know.
Totally. That's so real. I question that all the time of like, are we just talking to people who already agree with us? When I was first getting into the space, it was like positive vision, positive vision, positive vision. Like that's what you should lead with. And then you invite people to share stories that trigger a sense of desire for that positive vision. But now with the climate that we're in, sometimes I'm kind of like, I think it's like a step before, like path to positive vision, like something that feels tangible and real. Rachel, much like your intervention, I imagine that Swipe Out Hunger would have gone in a completely different direction, not just in its efficacy, but in the resonance that it had. Because I remember, the noise that it made. But I imagine if you had come out with like a scholarly, like, here's the reasons and the things and the this, and that was like, okay, I'm ideologically aligned, but like I don't live purely in ideology, which sounds a little weird to say in this climate, but like I also live just like on the ground, like having lunch. Like,
can I actually say totally like you need the action alongside the research, which was critical to our growth. But Jason sent a message about a mutual that we have, Jose. MTVU and MTV did a partnership with the White House called Campus Champions of Change. And they put out a call to all these college students saying, if you're doing something important, submit your work. And out of thousands of groups, we collected like tens of thousands of votes to get the chance to go to the White House to meet President Obama. It was our senior year of college. And it was Jason and his team that like really helped bring that kind of these kind of projects. I'm assuming that project to
That
life.
is crazy.
And it was that moment that we're like, wait, everyone in our city is like, you're breaking the rules. Like every day they're threatening to shut down our program. And here we are being legitimized and validated for the vision of the future that we can see where no student goes hungry. And it was a huge turning point for us. We established a nonprofit. We came together and it was a catalyzing moment for us. And so to this notion of it takes a lot of things. It takes platforms. It takes research. It takes activists. Because Jason probably never thought that he played a role in getting us into where we are today. And it is just totally proving your point.
That's incredible.
I love that. Look at this little full circle, small world little moment here at Issue Space. We love to see it. May I ask, what are the parts of your vantage point in change making that are empowering, and what are the points that are frustrating? So Carolyn, not to project anything on you, you could be like, everything's perfect, but I'm curious because I know that the work that you do is relatively high level, even though it empowers the grassroots. But then I know that behind the scenes in your personal life, you do a lot of community level work, local politics work. And so I kind of wonder, like, is that just like who Carolyn is, what she would be doing anyway? Or are you craving like another side of engagement, against your issues that you're not getting through the 9-to-5 version of your social impact work?
Yeah, no, I think that's totally fair to say. I mean, I feel very lucky that I work remotely from my rural home state in Vermont in international development. But at the same time, I look at, again, some of my friends who are working in schools and working at the grassroots level. And I also am the type of person that loves that sort of interaction. So I am glad that I have the ability outside of work to engage in particular ways and the types of ways that I'm not necessarily doing at work, which is a lot of, writing and engaging with smart people, but ultimately, like, donors have the money and we have to operate within that. In particular, the main funder of my organization's work is USAID, which is an agency within the US government. And, they have particular interests and they're very bureaucratic and they're not that interested in risk. And so while I think when I do my job my best, I'm able to maximize impacts on the ground within that system, it can feel very limiting sometimes. And my organization is a for-profit organization and, has interests of its own as well. So while I find it really rewarding in some ways, I also get a lot out of the volunteer type experiences I have right in my local community. So I think it's a both thing for me that makes me feel the most fulfilled. And yeah, I'm grateful to have the opportunity to do those things at this time. We'll see if my future life allows for such 40 hours a week plus more. But it is rewarding right now.
What about for you, Jason? Because kind of back to what we were touching on before, like you could stay on one end of the spectrum or the other with regard to who you support in your work. Is there a conscious choice of like, I want to be involved on both ends of the tug of war, so to speak?
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't want to be tugging on the evil side of the rope, I'll say.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you meant a grassroots, grass tops tug of war, not a good versus evil.
Yeah, I view the tug of war as good versus evil. And I think there are grassroots activists and national media folks and, principled elected leaders who are all tugging on the end of good. And that's where I feel like there's room at the table for everybody. To the point of the pendulum swing or the needle and the compass, for me, I feel like I naturally kind of ebb and flow towards more national and more grassroots. And sometimes it's not always super intentional. Sometimes I'll notice that I'm putting more of a premium on one or the other because I feel like I'm really committed to being the most well-rounded change maker I can be. And see, as you're in your career for a while too, I mean, there are lessons learned from things we did at MTV in like 2012 or 13 that don't feel super relevant anymore. Like there may still be a core principle there, but the metaphor I use is like keeping the blade sharp. Like you need to continue to be a practitioner to keep your blade sharp, because otherwise it gets dull, and then you're citing something, and then media's changed so much, and audiences generations have changed. So I think there's something to that. I think another thing I've seen is just as you are exhilarated and excited about a phase in your career, and then maybe the frustration starts to seep through, that may compel you to switch gears and want to do something else. And I'll give you one particular example is just around demonstrable change, progress. I think all of us, we know movements need wins to continue to thrive and grow, because otherwise people don't see the possibility of that better future. So progress. I worked with Erica at Everytown for Gun Safety for 3 years and was in the deep end of this American epidemic of gun violence in America. And I felt like I had to just take that one thing on because it was so big and so nuanced and so complicated and so deeply rooted. And we had a lot of latitude to experiment and try new approaches, to develop a cultural strategy that wasn't really part of the space before. And there were a number of things that we tried as experiments and pilots that really worked. Like we were having a number of big successes. The really frustrating thing was every year, even though we're building political power, we're building cultural power, the number of Americans who die at the end of a gun every day was going up. It was going up every year. And so there was something to the duality of like, it feels like we're making change and progress, but meanwhile, more and more people are dying. And I think I got to a point where I think for my own mental health, my own emotional health, I needed to unplug from the movement because it was starting to affect me in a visceral way, where I was constantly sitting across the table from somebody who'd had a loved one shot and killed. And I was like, I care deeply about this work. I'll be in this movement forever. I need to take a break. So I kind of tapped out of that tug of war. And then it wasn't super intentional, but I ended up doing a lot of work around workforce development. I've been doing that for some time now. And there's something so immediate and so gratifying when you help somebody get a better job. I did this work you mentioned with Skill Up, and there was a young woman who was a third shift custodian making $20,000 a year. And she went through a training program and became an IT tech. And now she makes $60,000 a year. And what it has made possible for her family. And Skill Up has a metric they track. Their overall kind of holy grail metric is lifetime earnings added. Lifetime earnings added. So if you take an individual who makes that transition from 20 to 60 in their early 30s, and then you portray that out over the rest of their career, and then you look at everybody you're doing that for, they're now at a point where it's like several $billion of lifetime earnings added. And so you get the instant gratification of like, that person came to us, found this training program, now has a whole new kind of set of opportunities as a result. And so that kind of fills my gas tank up in a way where I was really starting to get beat down by the gun violence work. And that's not to say that I won't at some point, I really want to get back in that fight. But I think you will have these moments in your career where you need a different feedback loop from your work. And that's one example that's pretty salient for me.
Completely. I really appreciate how honestly you're speaking about gratification in this work, because I think in our most romantic notions of what it is to work in social impact or social change, we're like always in march mode, as in like demonstration, like the passion, the tenor, the relentlessness, the just holding of a line, I think is very rallying for people. But just like you can't march 24 hours a day, you need to go home and go to sleep. I think we also need to acknowledge that if you choose this as work, you do need some of the gratifiers of work. You do need, we already know, as I always say, we're not going to get like the quarterly sales number type of positive feedback loop or just any feedback loop. It's generational, it's systemic, it's harder to track. We're always trying to figure out how to measure it, how to feel like we're making a difference and we're not just like a drop in the ocean, but against the backdrop of that, how do you carve out enough wins for yourself to feel motivated to keep going, to feel healthy? I don't hear that talked about openly a lot personally, especially from leaders. So I appreciate that, Jason, because I think it's something for people to think about. How do you, if you're not going to get your tank filled externally as often as any of us might like, as evidenced by the fact that we all still have jobs in this space. We've not solved the things. What are you going to do in terms of how you shape your own career and engagement with this work, to just not go crazy and not tap out? And for me, that's the biggest thing. Just don't burn out. Like, change, shift, refresh, renew, rest, come back, but just don't abandon. Nothing like hurts me more than when I'm talking to like a mentee or a managee who's like, okay, done with this phase. I'm going to go sell whatever shampoo. Like, it's your life. It's your path. We don't all have the same path, but that really depresses me. Like, I want to see talent and passion put towards making the world more sustainable and fair and inclusive and safe for human beings. That's the thing that I want to see. So I just appreciate your candor.
And I think one thing that's helped me with that wrestle that I've also, had in my career is the importance of trying to identify for myself, the issues and like the hard, mission driven things that really motivate me. And also my skill sets and interests more on the soft side that also like fill my cup, whether it's, meeting all new types of people from around the world, or learning about, flooding in Nepal for the first time, and thinking through, who are the types of actors that we should continue talking to solve, this issue, and being able to hold those numerous things for myself instead of like a singular identity, I think has made me more well-rounded and resilient to burnout, or, something can change and having it like rock my world. So I think there's a balance there that helps me feel a little more steady. Though maybe at the same time, I suppose I could argue it might take away my, the power that a lot of more single mission folks might have, which is an amazing and inspirational thing. But again, I think can be much more susceptible to burnout.
And to your point about letting go of singularity, not just a single professional identity, but not just a single definition of success, is also what I'm hearing between the lines of what both you're sharing and what Jason shared. Success might not be in the immediate, as painful as it is. It might not be seeing that rate of violence drop, but maybe it is growing your movement, and just taking the positive steps forward where you can. So I'm wondering if you can illuminate for folks, what kind of political considerations do you have to hold on either end of the spectrum? So Carolyn, you kind of mentioned like having a funder and sort of alluding to like that is a presence and a force in the work that you do. Likewise, if you're embedded in the grassroots, I know like keeping good relationships with everybody's significant, but with key players in community, building trust, just building that rapport is important. So I'm wondering for any of you, based on where you spent most of your careers, vantage point wise, what are some of the notes that you might tell somebody thinking about entering this work to consider politically?
Back when I was also considering law school, I was considering being a foreign service officer for the U.S. government, being a diplomat. And I took that test. I actually passed it, but then immediately failed the next round. It's a whole thing. And looking back, I don't think that career would have suited me well at all, because as depending on where your salary comes from and the interests you're representing, I don't think it would have matched my more activist personality. And that's a tension I still feel a little bit in the work that I do with a particular funder that, has certain political interests. And of course, people in my sector, with the U.S. government being such a major donor, are very aware that there might be a change of administration in a couple months, and that the funds that we currently have for women's empowerment and LGBTQI projects and climate change might get slashed heavily. So that's a space that it's really tough in terms of donor funding, and the words that and terms we use in our proposals match whatever the donor is feeling that that administration or at that time. So that's something I'm aware of, and sometimes I want my proposals or the projects we propose to be more progressive than we pitch them, just because I know that donor will resonate with those particular thoughts. But so that can be hard.
Thank you for the openness. I have to imagine that there's no, I'm going to pull from like being a married person, but like there's like no partnership without some level of concession and compromise. And it feels really personal in this space where you're probably most motivated after whatever tragedy breaks your heart by personal values. It seems like a really personal decision to figure out what concessions am I more comfortable making and how often.
There's this like purity test that we have on the left for some reason that has never resonated with me. As an example, we had multiple food companies and food service companies who wanted to work with us at Swipe Out Hunger. And historically, students have been opposed to working with these institutions that have presences on hundreds of our campuses. They are key stakeholders in feeding students every day. Instead of dismissing the partnership opportunity, we approached these companies and we said, where is there space for us to work together? Is it us adding our policy agenda items to your lobbying team's policy docket? Check. Is it you leveraging your efficiency of food purchasing or your delivery systems to let us get a bigger bang for our buck? Check. So that doesn't mean we work with everyone. That means we work with the people who are willing to make it a win-win. I would say the biggest stakeholder lesson I learned is there's never someone you shouldn't work with, whether it's a student or a researcher or a company or a funder. It's really like, who are the folks who are trying to win, who are like just trying to, there's not enough. There's a competitive mindset. One of us has to be the winner or the loser in this partnership versus those who operate really like, no, we're all on the same page, right? I think as a leader, your job is to really try and get folks to remember we have a shared mission here. Let's work together. Let's find the win-win, which are always the greatest moments. And, you always have the autonomy to walk away when it doesn't feel aligned.
That's such a powerful reminder. I love the vision of co-authoring success rather than just like closing the door. Like that, I could have used that talking point in spaces past where, you do get people being resistant. And I've been there too. There's been some times where I just I can't see how we bring our values into concert, but I really appreciate, the lesson that you're taking, like start at the most, what I'm going to take from it is like start at a practical compromise. And don't spend a lot of time up here in the ideology, but what is a real tangible thing you can do to demonstrate good faith and alignment with what we're trying to do. And let's start there. And for as long as those things are honored, let's go. Like,
yeah, especially if you're like doing the work Caroline's doing. It doesn't matter who the administration is if you vibe together or not. You're going to have to learn to work with people who you don't fully agree with. And, the lessons we can take up on the outside, we can bring to the moments when you can't control who's on the other side of the table.
Are there any disconnects, especially each of you in your own ways has worked at multiple levels in change making? Are there any just clear, glaring disconnects that you see from one side to the other of like, the systems people never see that the communities are asking for XYZ, or I wish I could share with the communities the full story on ABC and how it works? Are just any like intuitive things that feel disjointed?
Well, this is an instance where I think you are really well served by toggling back and forth and understanding the lived experience and the felt experience on both sides. Because I know I've encountered people who do national work at scale and they've never done the grassroots work. They've never seen the beautiful PDF that they've created that has got a saturated dark background need to get printed out on a printer where like it's already low on toner, because there's just, they never had to think with that filter, that lens. So I think having that experience of going back and forth will make you better in both, because you're pre-wired to just consider more variables than you would otherwise. So if I'm being, reductive, I have seen sometimes there can be an arrogance on the national system side where it's like, well, we got together and we did the literature review and we've now got the blueprint for how we solve this problem. And, and maybe there were interviews with folks who do on the groundwork, but like, did you co-create it with them? Do you know what their constraints are in community so that you're not coming down from the mountaintop with the stone tablets like, I've got the answer, but it's more like, I know you need X and I'm here to help solve that problem for you. This is one of the big challenges I've seen with like narrative change work, is where narrative strategists come up with like the new narrative, like the good narrative, and then they try and force it down the throat of people who engage directly with folks who are experience these challenges on a daily basis. So I think just to the degree that we can have more dialogue, and for both parties to be wired and looking for like, how can I benefit from the knowledge, the experience, the skills that this other party brings to bear? But I see that disconnect almost every day on almost every issue. I think it's pretty common, and it's holding us back for sure.
Jason, you're describing international development for sure. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, same in the food space. Is it nutrition comes first or food access comes first? Can people use their food stamps on soda or not? If, farmers market double boxes is like this big push and pull of the, academic side versus the impact side.
So maybe a need to be even more intentional, slow down even further to build diverse coalition on the outset. Is what it sounds like, to an extent. Maybe not a one shot without like really listening and co-creating and applying the insights, but definitely a place where we could double down. Well, I'm so grateful to each of you for today's conversation. I think I found it illuminating, and I've worked in social change for 8 years now. I'm hoping that other folks will find it a really compelling and just considerate window into what it's like to try to work across systems. When you're only one person, you can only do so much as one. I have 3 closing prompts, and you can answer one of them, some of them, all of them. One closing question for you is, what do you do to stay sustained and motivated in the work? Another one is, if you wanted people to take away just one thing from this conversation, what would it be? And the last is, if you have anything that you're working on that you're excited about or that you'd like us to know about.
I'd say what keeps me sustained and motivated is I do believe that the work I do improves the world. But what's important too is that I really feel like I'm on a team at my workplace, and that also helps prevent burnout, that I can take leave and the organization isn't going to fall apart because I'm gone. So having really good colleagues makes a big difference. And also having lots of interests and identities outside of work definitely really fills my cup, to be out in nature, to volunteer with a couple very community, local level organizations. Really, I think makes me see all of the different ways that, I can be a good neighbor, and a good community member and a good, international development practitioner, all at the same time.
Beautiful.
At a time when it feels like every issue and crisis in the world is our responsibility because we can see it, it is very overwhelming. And I go back to this Jewish teaching that says, you're not obligated to complete the work, but neither are you free to desist from it. And it immediately makes me realize, like, I do not have to solve the entire problem. Like, what is my goal for today? Like, I live and die by my to-do list. Like, this is what success means, because when there is so much more need. I have a consulting practice now, and many of my clients, there's huge issues that we're tackling. So I remember, like, what does success mean to me? I want people to take away that the best way to learn your role is to try things on and not feel like it has to be your whole identity. There's such a public facing part of this where if you, say this is your work, I felt this in hunger and now I've expanded to so many other issue areas. You don't have to worry that it becomes your whole identity because you do it once. Like, just keep trying things. You can change and evolve your identity so many times in this space. And a project I just finished working on is with a really awesome organization based out of Boston called the Teaching Kitchen Collaborative. They are helping people connect back to food through teaching kitchens, through learning knife skills, through learning their connection with their community, and just really excited about the work that they'll be doing. And they work with over 60 kitchens across the U.S. Really excited about what's going to happen with their work.
Awesome. Thank you, Rachel. Jason, last thoughts from you?
Super. I really resonate with the point you just made, Rachel, around. Well, I think there's two things for me. One is just to take a pause and appreciate the fact that you get paid to make change. Like, however much you get paid or how many trade-offs that you make, a lot of us could be making more working in investment banking or something else. But it's like, if you are saving for the future, you're able to pay your bills, provide for your family, and you spend your day doing really meaningful work. Like, I can't tell you how many times I've been at a cocktail party or in a group setting, and then, what do you do? What do you do? What do you do? And then I say what I do, and I'm like, oh my God, you can do that? Like, that's a job. Yeah. So I think really to just recognize how privileged and special that is. And it's very easy to get bogged down in, the macro trend lines in the country, or is that grant request going to come through? Or, oh my God, this was such a hectic week. But I think to be able to zoom out and have that appreciation, and in terms of the work we do to celebrate the small victories, to celebrate when that individual transitions from 20K to 60K, because I believe that better is better. That was President Obama often said, better is better. We may not solve these problems. We're not going to get from 0 to 100, but if we're contributing to people's lives, being able to live better, more free, just, fair lives, I think just it goes back to the recognition and the appreciation. But nobody's going to do that for you. You have to do that for yourself.
That's right. Wonderful, wonderful closing thoughts. Thank you all so much for this conversation. I think it was illuminating, and Issue Space community, follow along with this conversation and others at issuespacemedia.com. We will see you soon. Thanks, everybody.